And we are live at the Venture to Victory podcast, where we look at the entrepreneurial journey from funding to exit. I'm your host, Tim Tonella, CEO of MatchStar Venture Search. And today I'm totally pumped because we have AJ Loiacono in the house, one of the founders and CEO of Capital RX, an amazing company. If you want to learn how to build a $1 billion plus company in less than 6 years, you're not going to want to miss this. AJ, how you doing?
Thanks for having me, Tim.
Awesome. I want to first start by saying my young 13-year-old had asked me last night, he knew I was doing a podcast today, and I was talking about the cool people I have on. And he said, "Who are you interviewing tomorrow?" And when I said him his name, he said, "AJ, I like that name. AJ is cool. Kids love that kind of name." And then I showed him a picture on LinkedIn, and he goes, "Is that a picture with a bear cub?" I said, "No, I think that's his dog." But it's really an adorable picture. Just looking at that kind of sets the tone for the expectation when you talk to someone that's going to be a fun podcast. So love that. But let's talk about some serious stuff. So AJ started Capital RX around 6 years ago. Capital RX is a software SaaS platform that really is focused on changing the way prescription drugs are priced. There's also a lot more behind that with pharmacy benefit management solutions for employers, unions, and healthcare systems. And the overall goal is to reduce prescription costs for consumers and organizations and simplify that process. Now, this is really an important issue as we've got a presidential election going on right now. And it's really funny. It seems like both candidates are trying to one-up each other on how they got Medicare prices down for insulin. So it's kind of a microcosm for the bigger issue. But for people who are aging or ill, the ability to get access to drugs at a reasonable price and to even get them at all is such an important issue today for everybody. And it's amazing that we have your company out there that's actually changing that. Now, a little bit of a Capital RX. I find this incredible that you've raised $360 million of venture capital, including this past March, you did $115 million Series E round that was valued at $1.5 billion. Very, very cool. You're also the 2020 and 23 Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award recipient. I was on a screening committee many, many years ago for this on a local level in Orange County, and I know how tough it is, even regionally, to qualify. To win the full award is a big deal. And this is a stat that you almost never hear, that you have a 99.5% retention rate. Now, that's something incredible, because when people are trying to build a business, if all they're doing is digging a hole in the sand and the sand's replacing it, you never get anywhere. But when you never lose a client, we're pretty close to that. That's a way to really build a company, really build a business, and really build valuation. Prior to that, AJ, he's a serial entrepreneur. He had started Traveris, SMS Partners, and Vitrix with a number of those kind of, I guess they were the lead-in for what you're doing today. That's where it all came from. He attended Manhattanville College, where he studied finance, but he also played soccer and rugby, which is kind of interesting. If I were a soccer player and I showed up for my game and I found out that the players on the other side, or the person I'm defending, was also a rugby player, I think I'd have maybe a different perspective. So I don't know if that's a common thing or not. Maybe that's a fun way to start off. But I'm so excited to have you in the house, and would love to find out a little bit about how you grew up, where you grew up. What was that spark at some point in time where you said, "Hey, I think I should start a business or a company"?
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple of threads there to pull on, which is, I want to be fair. I played soccer first, and the rugby coach saw me and said, "Hey, do you have a good quick kick and you like to run and get physical?" And I was like, "Sure." And he's like, "You should come out to the rugby team." So he recruited me in my senior year. I think also you mentioned my dog, which is in my picture. The reason why my dog, and by the way, my dog's name is Kuma, which in Japanese means bear. So your son wasn't too far off. But Kuma came to me as a puppy literally the week before I started Capital RX. So I feel like he's really a part of the journey with me. And
He's like the company mascot.
unofficially, we'd like to say Judy is our mascot, since she's the brains of our organization. And we'll talk about Judy later, which is our claim processing and enterprise platform. But, my, what I would say road to being an entrepreneur is really boring. And I say this all the time, is I didn't have anything traumatic or exciting happen to me during my childhood. I think some people that know me would say that I was a bit of a troublemaker during my time, before college. But, I think when I entered the workforce, I was just really excited about having a job and paying rent. And I tell a story because I was doing supply chain consulting, working for very large manufacturers. And I had grown my first company to, I didn't really even know I was an entrepreneur. Honestly, I was taking advantage of 1099 tax incentives on a consulting side and creating a bench of engineers. But I
Of
was
course.
really creating my first business. And it was during this time that we had grown to maybe 30 engineers on my bench. And a partner from Accenture was working on my project because this large manufacturing company in pharmaceutical, Accenture ran most of their global manufacturing programs. And we were doing an install of Oracle ERP. I think the year might have been 2004, 2005. And we had grown, to about 30 engineers, but I was on a lot of projects with Accenture. And he was just like, hey, why don't you come in? We're interested in buying your company. It's like, oh my God, it's amazing. And I sat down with him and he was like, I see that you have 30 engineers. What is your business plan to get to 300? And I was like, I don't have a plan to get to 300 engineers. And his whole demeanor changed. He just pushed his chair back from the table and he's like, so this is a lifestyle business? And he said it was such a disgust and disdain. And I was like, I guess. And he's like, oh, we're just not interested. And I went home that night. I did not sleep very well at all. And I started to question everything. Like, is there more to my life in the universe and what I'm supposed to doing? Is this some sort of fatalistic wake up call and I'm supposed to do something else? And I did end up selling the company to Chrysalis, a group in India, and it kind of set me on the road to having higher aspirations. Let me do something that's a bigger strategic partnership or requiring venture funding because we're solving a bigger problem. But that's what really this partner at Accenture, I should really take out to dinner because he's the one who instilled the fire in me to really do something, a little bit greater from an ambition standpoint.
Yeah, people always talk about this concept of having limited beliefs, which are somewhat framed by, how you grew up, what your experiences were when you were younger. A lot of people don't know that they can achieve so much more. And I do hear this story, not so much that, hey, I went back to my house and I felt disappointed in myself, but more to the sense where someone says, okay, now how are you going to 10x it? And you're thinking, my God, just getting here was so hard. The thought of now doubling it seems like a mountain to climb. And this guy's telling me to 10x it. But that is kind of the big idea. And that's one of the reasons, we started this podcast. So you could hear stories like yourself from other entrepreneurs. You could see that, wow, these guys had similar experiences. And maybe what I'm doing is I'm just not reaching high enough. But you have to have that competitive spirit and that fight in you. And I think being a soccer and a rugby player, a little bit of a troublemaker as a high school kid. Sounds like you got a little bit of that fight in you, but what an amazing story. Let me ask you about Capital RX because, when you thought about starting this business, was this a business that you just looked at analytically and said, wow, it's an important business and it could be a really great business, so let's do it? Or a lot of times what I find is businesses like this are somewhat passion projects in the sense that maybe they had a relative or a friend that really suffered from this inability to be able to afford prescription drugs. And you said, look, someone's got to do something about this, and it might as well be me. Where did you fall on that spectrum when you thought about starting this particular company, which was several companies later,
Sure.
obviously?
I think it was an accident. You could trace back in my history. My father was a pharmacist. And so, it's somewhat an industry, but there was no pressure to enter into his profession or to be involved in pharmaceutical supply chain in any way. It was just pure accident. I ended up in the industry and in the sector, although my father would take credit. But what happened over time was even more of an accident, which is I had a friend call me out of the clear blue and say, hey, you did pharmaceutical manufacturing I want you to look at pharmacy benefit management data. And I am like, what is this thing you described? They're like a PBM. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I've never heard of it. And they're like, are you sure? I go, I was in pharmaceutical manufacturing, but on the supply chain side, like software. Like, I go, my entire life ended at the loading dock. So we'd make a pallet of drug and it would be sold to a wholesaler like McKesson or Cardinal or ABC. And I had no idea what happened after that. I just assumed it went to a pharmacy and a patient, and there's some insurance. And they're like, well, this is that claims data. So if someone has a benefit plan, insured or uninsured, this is the claim transaction. And this happens to be a Fortune 500. I would like you to help us with this audit. And I was like, all right, I'll look at the data. You sign the NDA and you're into, the data room and you're working on the data. And I spent about 10 minutes with it. And what jumped off the page, and I tell this story all the time, is why does it look like drugs are changing every hour of every day in every pharmacy for every drug? I'm like, that's not how drug pricing works in the United States, at least not from the supply chain. Drug pricing, you could set a clock to in the United States. Branded medication, typically twice a year, depending upon, the schedule. It's usually January, July. And generic drugs, again, based upon your purchasing schedule, it typically will be anywhere from monthly to quarterly. And that's the way it should behave. But it wasn't appearing that way in the data. So it was like, aha, I'm going to create a company that's going to help people navigate and audit and do procurement. And this was my first company before Capital RX. And it was during this time, I spent 7 years there. We built a great company, and it was at the time trying to really solve the problem that had already occurred. I used to often joke it was like being part of a police force and the crime had already occurred. I wasn't
Right.
changing the way drugs were paced, or I wasn't changing patients or service the way they're serviced. And so I really wanted to fix that. And so I left and formed Capital RX. And this was the beginning of a very lengthy thesis I'd been writing for 18 years to myself and applying all of that knowledge into Capital.
Amazing. So where is the company today? I mean, obviously, you've raised a lot of money, got a big valuation. Are you still kind of early in your growth stage, or do you feel like you're getting more to a mature side? Like, where do you want to, what's the ultimate goal that you want to achieve?
I mean,
Not a financial goal. Who knows how that will transpire? But what's the goal that you have personally for the business and the problem that you're trying to solve?
yeah, I mean, I think we've definitely graduated into being a growth stage organization. I often say we don't have sales risk at this point in the organization or financial risk. Knock on wood, we have operational risk and implementation risk. As you get bigger and bigger, that becomes a little bit more of a focus of myself and the management team. But the other part of it is a constant evolution. So if you looked at the company when we started, we were very focused on a very thin segment, if you will, which was PBM, small market, self-insured pharmacy benefit. And then over time, as we gained more experience, we started to go upstream to mid-market and large market employer and plan sponsors. The other thing that we started to branch off into is we thought our systems and applications could help Medicaid claim processing and Medicare processing. Now we're in government claim processing. The other thing that we started to realize was this concept of an enterprise platform, that it's not just about the technology that sets up a benefit plan and processes claims with some reporting extract. It was, how do you harmonize dozens of different work streams that are used to manage a benefit plan? So everything from underwriting to implementation to call center, network management, clinical decision support, formulary management, billing, reimbursement, the list goes on and on. But this was the evolution of a system we come to know as Judy. Judy is short for adjudication, and she's the brains of our organization. See, she's our secret weapon. She is the ability for us to scale securely and provide the flexibility and framework for any type of commercial or government plan. More importantly, because all of these work streams are operating in harmony to this single source of truth I talk about, you can apply machine learning and AI efficiently because in real time, not just your training on the data, but you're now able to instruct to have actionable outcomes based upon those observations and training. And so Judy suddenly becomes a framework of both what I call reducing variable costs, taking cost out of administrating a plan, and also creating better insights and better patient management, better outcomes. And this is only possible with one, the technology we develop, but two, the principle of being what we talk about neutral, unbiased, that we're a pure administrator. We don't make money on drugs. We do not own fulfillment assets like mail facilities and pharmacy chains and specialty and GPO. We just want to be the best service administrator. And if someone comes to us with an idea and says, hey, we're thinking of doing a partnership with this manufacturer or partnering with this pharmacy, the one answer your vendor should give you, and this is what I tell everyone on my team, is how can I help?
Yeah. So if we boil it down to the average consumer, all they want to know is, how can I get my drugs at a fair price? Sure. Why is it that I can drive to Mexico and buy them for $100 and then they're $2,000 in the US? Or why is it when the new year starts, you go to get your medication, sure, and they say it's $5,000 or some ridiculous number, and they say, well, you haven't completed your deductible yet. So then you write a check for like $3,000 to finish your deductible, and then it magically drops down with insurance to $200, every couple months. The variation is so extreme. Like, how do you tackle, I mean, obviously efficiency and how you process things, I get all that, but how does that drive down drug prices when they're so significantly high? Is that negotiated terms that you work out, or what's a secret sauce? How does Judy help do that for me and for anybody watching this, for my parents, well, let's say? Yeah.
I think you're hitting on the first part, which is if we're hyper efficient, we don't need to make money on drug spend. And once you don't make money on drug spend as an administrator, you can really be aligned with the plan sponsor and the patient. So you're going to, one, give people access to what I call unencumbered drug pricing. There's no middleman taxing the rates that we provide in network, which is the way it should be. The second thing you're going to be able to do is to focus on outcomes, to focus on making patients educated and aware of alternatives. So just because you may start with drug A, a lot of patients may not know there's a lower cost alternative or alternatives available for the same condition. And so educating them to help them through that. The other thing is, if you have a plan sponsor that is, let's just say, presently manages a high deductible plan, can you work with them to help them understand that by investing in a stronger benefit package, that you could have this concept of total cost of care? You're going to reduce medical costs. You're going to have more days of attendance that you're going to have, and I often say it's this laws of zeros, where if you're spending $1 million on pharmacy benefit as an employer, you're probably spending $5 million on, say, take your pick, your medical premiums. And then you're probably spending on top of that, anywhere from, take your pick of, $50 million in, headcount and overhead. And so, what you want people to understand is healthcare is an investment. We understand there are different risk corridors and different expectations based upon the tenure of the employer, the time and the attrition rate of employees. But we're trying to have people understand that once you have an aligned PBM, you've unlocked the ability to really focus on the health and care side of the patient. I think all too often in healthcare, people forget the word care is in our industry. And it's very important, because I would hope anyone who starts a business in this industry really enjoys taking care of people and helping people become healthy.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I think it's an industry where there's so much vilification of the producers, right? The drug companies are evil and this and that, and there's always bad apples. But my God, if we look back at, decades ago, how some of these medications has fundamentally changed our life expectancy and the quality of our life. I mean, the fact that you're working with the drug companies, working with the pharmacies, and trying to figure out how can we make the ecosystem more efficient to ultimately drive down a benefit. Because the ultimate goal, even of a drug company, right, is to help people. If the drugs don't help people in the long term, they're not going to be in business. So very cool, very admirable. I'd love to pivot really quickly into this whole concept of entrepreneurialism, because this isn't your first time to the rodeo. Sounds like you've had multiple successes, as we talked about earlier. What are some of the qualities that you see that make someone a successful entrepreneur, including, the ability to be resilient and recover? Because I think sometimes people think, well, an entrepreneur is just they're like you with the Trojan picture in the background. We're just going right through the fire, or we're just going to full steam ahead and be successful. And that's not the way it is. Entrepreneurs come in every background. There are the Elon Musk type that are prolific and out there. There are also a lot of entrepreneurs that are more on the quiet, shy side, and they're analytical, and they maybe are not persons, yet they're still extremely successful. Are there common threads that you see from your learned experience that would be valuable?
I mean, first understand everything that you're horrible at. Understand
I love
every
that.
weakness and admit to it. Now,
That's tough.
a lot of people can't do this, but if you can do this, you can unlock what you do very well. And what you want to do is find your complement or complements to shore up your weaknesses so you can be the force multiplier in what you do really well. And I talk about, the principles of being the force multiplier on your team, which is also this concept of min-maxing, which is a very gamer-esque term I use all the time. Yes, I play video games. But the point of it is a min-maxer is going to look at a combination of inputs, oftentimes extraordinarily complex sequencing, and find the pattern. I don't want to use the term exploit, but the ability to win more efficiently. So I think the first one is being humble, admitting your faults, and finding your complement. The other thing that I always want to talk about is the ability to continue to observe the environment and business around you and evolve with it. I talk about this all the time, is if a company isn't evolving every 5 years, it will be dead, put out of business.
Yeah.
And even if you are the challenger, and even if you are the disruptor, if you just become stagnant and just stick with your business model, you're going to get into trouble quickly.
Yeah.
Because the world is moving way too quickly and companies must continue to.
Yeah, I think that, going back some years to the concept of the innovator's dilemma, that's certainly an issue. If you are successful and you have entrenched markets, it's so easy to not innovate further, not because you don't have the ability, but you don't want to cannibalize your own business. So I think today, you're right, you see it because competitors can come in, particularly with software businesses, right, where you don't need extreme amounts of capital and I think if people sit on their laurels for a while, certainly for half a decade, as you just said, it is right for, smaller entrants to come in and kind of take part of that market share and out innovate you. So really an awesome point. I have to ask you, you said earlier, you got to step back and be honest with your own faults, which is very, very difficult. When did you come to this realization? Was it, did something happen? Was it early in your career? And if you're okay with it, you're on the psychologist's couch right now. What was the first or the biggest one that you had to deal with?
Well, I mean, I mentioned one, which was, why was I not unlocking the next step in my first, business, which was, why didn't I evolve? Was that a fundamental flaw of myself? Was it, I was risk adverse, or I wasn't making observations. I wasn't trained. I wasn't listening. So those are little things you pick up. But if you want to go to the moment that changed my life forever,
Yes,
it wasn't my old company. And I was making some observations in market, and I was challenged by my board, to be like, hey, we're here. I want to take us to 10X. How do we get there? And I wrote a 60-page business plan, like a very detailed go-to-market strategy, market assessment. I did all the right things. And I presented it. And I want to be fair. I lost the argument. And that's okay. Shame on me. My 60 pages weren't enough. Maybe I needed 6 pages and, a zippier title. I don't know. But I lost the argument, and in doing so, I lost the faith of the board. I lost the argument forever. And it was clear to me that it was time for me to move on. That after 7 years, I put my heart and soul into this organization. But what I had discovered is that some people can't face the reality of maybe they are blockbuster. Maybe the
Yeah.
model is dating itself and you need to move on, or maybe it just can't scale. Maybe there is no 10x in this business. I couldn't see it, and I was being honest with my board. And I think that's the lesson that came to me. It was very humbling because up to this point, I felt like I was a little bit untouchable, a little bit like, hey, I've always produced, I've always been the rainmaker, I've always, gotten us to the next chapter. And all of a sudden, you lose an argument, you lose favor and faith with your board and investors, and you're on the outside. And you have to make some really hard decisions, which is, do you stay in an organization that may not fully appreciate your position and you don't necessarily believe in because you just had a report that we should change, or you move on and you start all over again. And I opted for start all over again. But it was definitely that moment I started to make some real observations about why I had lost this argument and what were the repercussions, and it was, the self-examination of you're not as good as you think about this. And I think there was a maturity that came with it, that's okay. You're not supposed to be great at everything. But what you are supposed to do is to focus on the things that you can do at an extraordinary level. And if you can't find a place in your current organization to do those things, do it somewhere else.
That's amazing. Such a good point. I mean, we've worked together, obviously, in the past. That's how we know each other. But I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. Carolyn works with a lot of entrepreneurs as well in our firm. And we see some of the problems that occur between the founders and the boards. And it's interesting to see a founder that is willing to let go. So much of the conflict is, I started this. This is my baby. I'm not going to give it up. And what I find so fascinating about the two examples you gave that were these kind of coming to Jesus moments, right? The first one, which we talked about earlier, when you realized, wow, someone rejected me because I'm not a big enough thinker. Like that's a weird one. I thought I was doing pretty good. 30 engineers. I'm a young guy. And they're saying, no, you don't have the champion mindset. You don't think big enough. There's a lesson of humility there. And this one where you had to seriously say, maybe I'm at the end of the road and I've got to step back and accept that. But what defines you as a serial entrepreneur is you didn't quit. You took all that, you started again and again. And I got to think with the last funding round and the most recent valuation that this is the biggest win so far. So the lesson I always tell people is becoming a successful entrepreneur, it's never a straight up ride like this. It's like the stock market. It's up, it's down, up and more, up, down. And you just have to have that kind of killer instinct to get back in the game and learn and go from there. As we kind of wrap this up, is there any one or two key takeaways that you would have for any founders or entrepreneurial teams that have maybe hit a big impasse or a roadblock and they're struggling, wondering whether they're going to make it or not? What would you advise to them to kind of take that next step to maybe push through that barrier that's in front of them?
I mean, I start with the simplistic planning of always prepare for an apocalypse when there isn't one. And,
Yeah.
You just finish your round of funding. Now's the time to get the credit line. You got the money in the bank. You might need it, for a period of upheaval or chaos.
Yeah.
The other thing is when you do hit that moment where you're struggling and you slip on your first quarter numbers and then you slip on your second quarter of numbers and you might slip on your third and it's clear you have no chance of making your numbers for the year. First thing I'm going to say is own it. I've definitely been in a boardroom when I was younger and I was like, it might be November and we're behind on our numbers, but 50%, but we're going to do it. We've got this. Like, that's not being realistic. That's not running to the problem. I often quote Lisa Su, who's the CEO of AMD. And I don't know if this quote is real or not, but I attribute it to her because I respect her in so many ways, but it's run to the hardest problems. And I agree with that entirely. So the first thing is where there's smoke, there's fire. Like, let's it's Q1, things aren't working out. The time to address it is now. What do I need to do to change this? And this isn't think of it as an oil tanker. You're headed right for, unfortunately, an ice flow. 1 degree or 2 degrees heaving hard to port is not going to change the direction of the ship. You're going to have to do something pretty radical.
Yeah.
And that even might include yourself, your approach, outside advisors that might be bringing in the board. You don't want to hide these things. You want to show maturity and get out in front of it. And so this is my one piece of advice, because everyone will struggle. I mean, hey, the person who has never struggled in a business, wow, like amazing. I want to talk to you. But most of us struggle, every year with something. And the thing that has saved me is this, moment of honesty. Get out in front of it, bring people into the discussion, consider every option, consider radical change if necessary. Not radical change to your product or product market fit, but what's your usually if I'm reacting to something, it's go to market. If it's bigger and it's product market fit, then you might need a few more quarters of correction to get through it, but it doesn't really matter. Short-term, long-term struggle, face it, admit it, it's painful, but it's the only way you're going to save your company, possibly.
Yeah.
Because if you wait, you're dead.
Yeah. I think that's a sign of a great leader. One of the things, obviously, working with founders, CEOs, and a lot of companies that were startup companies that did go through trouble and became successful, one of the qualities that we always look for is, as a recruiter, how does a leader retain its best people when all of the trend lines are looking bad? Because there's other recruiters that are knocking on the door of your best people every day, and they see that, hey, I didn't get the funding round. A big competitor just opened in my backyard, and people have families and they feel like they're taking a risk going to a startup. And what really keeps them there, right, in spite of all that incoming, is the ability of the CEO to do that, or the founder. And it's usually the pattern I see is very deep honesty and looking at the problem for how it is, sitting down with your team, laying out the issues, not hiding anything, and saying, here's where we're at. If we do all these things together and have an open communication, we're going to find a way to try to make this thing work. And not every leader is like that. A lot of times people do not want to let their key employees know what's going on because they are worried if you show them too much negativity, too much risk, they're going to leave, go somewhere else. But the good ones are able to retain people because of that honesty and that humility, but also the track record you've built over time, where you can say, look, I've been through this many, many times with 3 or 4 companies. We've had our ups and downs. We've had our apocalyptic moments where we didn't think we'd come out of it, and we ultimately did. So I'm going to leave it at this, which is a big thank you first for joining the pod. I think it was an amazing series of lessons that you shared with people as a serial entrepreneur. I get the sense that this is not your last rodeo, even if Capital RX grows to be a $10 billion company. I think you enjoy doing this. You enjoy being in the fire. And I can't wait to see not only what Capital RX does, because it is providing such a broad service that helps individuals with a critical need, but it's going to be really fun to see what that next business is going to be, maybe, 5 years down the road.
I appreciate the vote of confidence.
I do.
But I always say you're only as good as your last quarter. So
that's true.
My goal is to hit this quarter's numbers and continue that process.
And if it's any consolation, if you ever do get down for the moment, you've got a big bear hug, you go hug to make you feel better. That'll get you through to the next day.
Puma has definitely given me plenty of supporting hugs over the last 6 years.
Thank you. Well, AJ, we really appreciate you being in the house today and sharing these amazing stories. And we look forward to seeing what happens next for Capital RX and you personally.
Thanks so for having me, Tim.
And that's a wrap.
The Venture to Victory podcast is provided by MatchStar Venture Search. If you're interested in any of our open executive roles or need help sourcing world-class talent for your company, check out our website at matchstar.com.